The year was 2155, and Mars had become a world of both hope and despair. When Earth first attempted to colonize the Red Planet, it had been filled with dreams of exploration and expansion. For decades, humans had worked tirelessly to build a society on the barren, cold world. Mars was seen as the next frontier, where humanity could build a better future away from the problems of Earth. But those dreams were shattered when the Mars colony was overtaken by a rogue faction called the Red Sun. The Red Sun had come to power after a brutal uprising against the original colonists, using force and fear to control Mars' most valuable resources, water, energy, and precious metals. They had established their control over the largest cities, including Haven City, the capital of Mars, and forced the settlers to live under strict and oppressive rule. The few remaining rebels who dared to fight were hunted down, their lives nothing more than fleeting hopes in the face of overwhelming power. Yet, a small faction of Earth's military, known as Red Dawn, had refused to accept Mars's fall into tyranny. The group was formed by those who still believed in the vision of Mars as a symbol of hope and opportunity. They were made up of former soldiers, scientists, engineers, and a few Martian natives who had never given up on their dream of freedom. In the heart of Earth's military headquarters, Commander Ava Kincaid stood before a map of Mars, tracing her finger over the red-marked areas, key sites where the Red Sun's forces had entrenched themselves. Ava, once a seasoned officer in Earth's military forces, had risen through the ranks to become the leader of the Red Dawn movement. Her decision to lead this battle was not just out of duty, it was personal. Years earlier, her family had been among the early settlers on Mars, and she had watched in horror as their dreams were crushed by the Red Sun's rule. Now she had gathered her most trusted comrades in a hidden underground base on Earth. They had one goal: to reclaim Mars. "We've been given one last shot," Ava said, her voice resolute as she addressed the team. "We know the risks. If we fail, Mars will be lost forever and the rebellion's hope will die with it. But we can do this. I've seen how the people on Mars are ready to rise. They need us." The room was filled with a mix of hardened soldiers and young, eager faces. Each of them had their reasons for joining the fight. For some, it was about restoring justice to a world they loved. For others, it was about revenge or redemption. But there was one thing they all shared: hope. Ava's second-in-command, Captain Elias Dunn, stepped forward. Elias had once been a leader in Earth's Special Forces before leaving to join the Red Dawn. He was known for his sharp tactical mind and a no-nonsense attitude. "The first phase of our plan will involve striking from the shadows," Elias said. "We'll sabotage key supply lines, hit their communication centers, and cripple their ability to respond. This isn't going to be a full-on assault, at least, not yet. We'll build our strength, strike from unexpected angles, and gain the trust of the Martian people." Another member of the team, a former engineer named Dr. Lena Patel, spoke up. Lena had spent years studying Mars's infrastructure and had a deep understanding of the planet's resource networks. She had designed much of the technology the Red Dawn would use in their assault. "Once we have their communication lines down, we can infiltrate the central power grid," Lena said. "That'll give us a chance to disrupt their energy supply and make it impossible for them to maintain control of the central areas." Ava nodded. "Once the grid is down, we'll move on Haven City. Our goal is to liberate the capital. It's the heart of the Red Sun's control. If we take it, the rest of Mars will follow." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the gravity of the plan. The attack on Haven City would be the hardest and most dangerous part. It would take everything they had and more. As the team continued to finalize their strategies, Ava reflected on what this mission meant. Mars was more than just a world to reclaim. It was the last hope for humanity's future. If they could take back Mars, it would prove that resistance against tyranny could succeed. The Red Sun's rise to power had been swift and brutal, but it could be undone. Ava refused to let Mars remain a prison for those who wanted to live free. While the Red Dawn was busy formulating their plans, the situation on Mars was becoming increasingly dire. Under the harsh rule of the Red Sun, the people of Mars had been reduced to mere subjects. their every move controlled by the occupying forces. The cities were divided between the ruling elite and the common citizens who lived in squalor, struggling to survive with limited resources. The once thriving colony was now a shadow of its former self, a barren wasteland where hope seemed to have vanished. Haven City, the jewel of Mars, was now a heavily fortified compound. Its towering skyscrapers were surrounded by miles of security checkpoints, surveillance drones, and military patrols. The streets were lined with propaganda posters that glorified the Red Sun's leader, General Kalen Voss, a man who ruled with an iron fist. Voss was known for his cruelty, a dictator whose vision of Mars was one of control, power, and submission. Within the city's walls, a growing resistance movement had formed, made up of former soldiers, scientists, and civilians. They were the ones who had not given up on Mars. They lived in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Among them was a young man named Leo Arden, a former settler who had seen his family torn apart by the Red Sun's forces. Leo had been one of the first to take up arms, and though his hopes were waning, he still believed that one day Mars would be free. Leo and the others had heard whispers of the Red Dawn's plans. Some doubted whether they would succeed, but Leo had no illusions. The rebellion could be their only chance. One night, as Leo stood at the edge of the city, looking out over the red-tinged landscape, he thought about what Mars could become again. The first settlers had dreamt of transforming the barren planet into a thriving world, a place of life and opportunity. Mars could still be that place, but first, it had to be freed. As Leo prepared to meet with the resistance leaders, he felt the weight of the task ahead. The rebellion's victory was uncertain, but the people of Mars could not afford to wait any longer. The time had come to fight back. As the sun set over Earth, casting an orange glow over the command center, the tension among the Red Dawn members was palpable. For months, they had been preparing for this moment, their final assault on Mars. Ava Kincaid stood at the front of the war room, her mind racing as she reviewed the plans one last time. Every move had been calculated, every detail accounted for, but there was still one thing she couldn't shake: doubt. The stakes had never been higher. Reclaiming Mars meant everything to them. If they failed, not only would the planet remain under the control of the Red Sun, but it would send a message to the entire galaxy that resistance against tyranny was futile. Ava took a deep breath, trying to clear her mind. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the consoles and the occasional murmur from the officers in the background. Behind her, the map of Mars flickered on the wall, showing key locations and the movement of Red Sun forces. At the center of the room, the strategy board displayed the latest intelligence. The Red Sun had fortified Mars's most crucial sites, but there were still weaknesses they could exploit. "All right," Ava said, turning to face her team. "This is the moment. We strike now or never." Captain Elias Dunn stepped forward, his face grim but determined. "The first phase is simple. We start small, get in and out quickly. We'll target their supply lines and their power grid. That's where we can hit them hardest, disrupt their infrastructure, and keep them from realizing we're even there until it's too late." Ava nodded. Elias was right. The Red Sun's strength lay in their ability to control the planet's resources, and if they could hit those targets, it would give them a fighting chance. She scanned the map of Mars again, focusing on the key locations Elias had mentioned: power stations, communication relays, and the supply depots scattered across the planet. "We'll hit these sites across different regions, using hit-and-run tactics," Elias continued. "No direct confrontation. We'll keep them guessing, and by the time they mobilize, we'll have already moved on to the next target." Dr. Lena Patel, the Red Dawn's brilliant engineer, spoke up from her station. "I've already prepared the disruptors we'll need for the power grids. We can take out their communication lines in less than an hour. The real challenge will be getting through their defenses without being detected." "Don't worry," Elias said, giving her a reassuring smile. "That's where you come in. We'll need your expertise to make sure the power is down long enough for us to get to Haven City. Once that's done, we'll move on to the second phase." Ava turned to Lena. And how long do you need to set up the sabotage on the power grid? Lena hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I can get the team in position within the next 48 hours. After that, we'll need another 24 hours to disable the grid and communications. It's tight, but we can do it. The clock was ticking. Every second mattered. Good. Once we take out their power and communications, we'll hit the main military bases, Ava said, her voice firm. Haven City is heavily fortified, but they've left some gaps in their defenses. We'll infiltrate the city, sabotage their weapons caches, and strike at the heart of their control. The moment we do that, the Red Sun's grip on Mars will begin to crack. Captain Dunn leaned forward. But Haven City's a fortress, Ava. If we're going in, we need to have a plan. We'll be outnumbered, and they'll have all their heavy artillery in place. We can't just rush in and hope for the best. Ava looked down at the map, tapping her fingers against the console. We'll need to move fast, hit their weak spots. We'll strike at the heart of their military command, using their own cities as cover. And we'll need to coordinate with the local resistance. They know the city better than anyone else. Leo Arden, one of the local Martians who had joined the Red Dawn, stepped forward. His presence was quiet but commanding, his eyes filled with a burning desire for justice. I can take you through Haven's tunnels, Leo said. The Red Sun's military uses the main roads, but we can sneak in through the underground network. It's risky, but it's the only way. Ava nodded. Leo had been invaluable, providing not only critical knowledge of the terrain but also understanding the mentality of those who had lived under the Red Sun's rule. You'll be leading the team for that phase. I trust you, Leo. Leo gave a curt nod and stepped back, his mind already working on the logistics of their plan. He had lived through the oppression of the Red Sun firsthand. His family had been forced into servitude, and he had spent years in the underground resistance, watching as his people suffered. This fight wasn't just about reclaiming Mars, it was personal. Once we're in position, Ava continued, we'll hit the communication centers and military strongholds simultaneously. We'll send a clear message. Mars will not be a prison for anyone. We fight for freedom, not just for Earth, but for all of us. The room fell silent as everyone took in Ava's words. The gravity of the mission settled over them, but there was no turning back now. They had spent years preparing for this moment, and they knew it was the only chance they had. Ava looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each member of her team. They were all in this together, and their loyalty and determination would be their greatest strength. This isn't just a fight for Mars, Ava said, her voice steady. This is a fight for the future of humanity. We're taking the first steps toward a free galaxy, and we will succeed. That night, as the team prepared for their assault, Ava stood alone in her quarters, staring out at the stars. Her thoughts were heavy with the weight of leadership, the lives that were about to be lost, and the world they were fighting for. But she knew this was the only chance for the galaxy. She could already hear the echoes of the battle to come. Mars was not just a symbol of human ambition, it was a symbol of hope, of resilience, of humanity's ability to rise above even the darkest circumstances. And as long as there was breath in her lungs, Ava Kincaid would not let that hope die. The first strike against the Red Sun forces was imminent. The Red Dawn had spent months gathering intelligence, assembling teams, and carefully planning each phase of their operation. Now the time had come to put their plans into action. The might and fate of Mars, and perhaps the entire future of humanity, rested on the success of their mission. Ava Kincaid paced back and forth in the command center, her eyes fixed on the map of Mars. Every key target had been assigned, every strategy detailed, to the smallest variable. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The first phase was about to begin, and everything had to go perfectly. Status report, Ava ordered, turning to Elias Dunn, who was overseeing the operation's logistics. The teams are in position, Elias replied. Lena's squad is ready to disrupt the power grid, and Leo's team is already underground, moving toward their first objective. We've got a window of about 48 hours before the Red Sun realizes what's happening. After that, we'll have to move fast. Ava nodded, her face hardening with determination. Let's make sure they don't see us coming. Keep the communication lines tight, I don't want any surprises. Elias turned toward the rest of the team, signaling them to begin their assignments. It was time to execute. On Mars, in the dark. Heart of the Red Sun's military operations, the first signs of the rebellion's arrival were subtle. The power to Haven City flickered for a brief moment, just long enough to cause confusion in the Red Sun's surveillance systems. The rebels had hacked into the power grid and now controlled the flow of energy through key parts of the city. Lena Patel and her team had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment, and the execution was flawless. The city's electronic defenses were temporarily disabled, leaving the Red Sun vulnerable. But as soon as the lights blinked out, a new wave of chaos erupted in the Red Sun's command center. Officers scrambled to regain control of their systems, but the rebels were already ahead of them. "This is it," Lena muttered to herself, watching as the lines of communication went down. "Let's see how they handle the dark." The team moved swiftly, planting more disruptors along the city's power lines, ensuring that the blackout would spread further. This wasn't just about taking out power, it was about hitting the Red Sun where they least expected it. As the capital's lights began to dim, so did the Red Sun's confidence. Meanwhile, Leo Arden's team was making their way through the tunnels beneath Haven City. These underground passageways had been used by the early settlers, and despite the Red Sun's attempts to block them, Leo knew every inch of them. The tunnels were narrow, and the air was thick with dust, but they were the rebels' best chance at infiltrating the city without detection. "Stay close," Leo whispered to his team as they moved through the dark corridors. "The Red Sun's patrols are everywhere. If we get caught, it's over." They moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the rocky ground. Leo led the way, his mind constantly calculating their next move. The underground network was more dangerous than it seemed, full of hidden traps, surveillance systems, and the occasional Red Sun patrol. But Leo had spent years in these tunnels. This was his home. Ahead, the team came to a small security checkpoint. Red Sun guards stood at attention, blocking their path. Leo motioned for the team to stop. They were too close to give away their position. He needed to think fast. He motioned to one of his team members, a young fighter named Mira, who was skilled with stealth and precision. She nodded and crept silently ahead, her figure blending into the shadows. With a swift move, she knocked out the guards, rendering them unconscious before they could even react. "We've got a clear shot," Leo whispered, signaling the team forward. "Let's keep moving." Above the surface, the battle for Mars had begun. The Red Dawn's forces, though outnumbered, were determined. Their ships descended into Mars's atmosphere, weaving through the planet's crimson skies. The Red Sun's fleet was larger and more powerful, but the rebels had the advantage of surprise. The first wave of rebel ships broke through the atmosphere, targeting the military bases that supplied the Red Sun's forces. Ava watched from the command center, her eyes glued to the screen as the first battle took place in the skies above. Rebel ships engaged with TIE fighters in a vicious dogfight, the sounds of gunfire and explosions crackling through the comms. "Focus fire on their fleet's flagship," Ava ordered. "If we can disable that ship, we can cripple their entire fleet." Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the screen. On it, rebel ships dove in and out of the dogfight, narrowly avoiding incoming blasts from the Red Sun's forces. The tension was palpable. Each fighter pilot's every move mattered. The rebels had no choice but to take risks. If they didn't succeed, their mission could end in disaster. Luke, a young pilot and one of the Red Dawn's best, flew with a steady hand. He had seen battles before, but this one felt different. Mars was his home, and this battle was personal. As he locked onto the flagship of the Red Sun fleet, he could feel the adrenaline rush through his veins. His targeting system beeped as he lined up his shot. "Locking onto their main reactor," Luke called out. He fired his missile just as the Red Sun flagship tried to maneuver out of the way. The missile struck its target with a deafening explosion, and the flagship was momentarily disabled. It swerved, listing to the side as smoke billowed from its core. "We got it," Luke shouted, his voice filled with triumph. "That's one down." But the battle was far from over. As the Red Sun flagship faltered, reinforcements arrived. The skies above Mars were soon filled with more TIE fighters and gunships, and the Red Sun retaliated with full force. The battle had escalated quickly and the rebels were starting to lose ground. "We've got incoming," Elias warned, as Red Sun forces closed in on their position. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. The first victory was in their grasp, but now they had to secure it. "All ships focus on the TIE fighter formation. We can't afford to lose momentum now." On the ground, Leo's team had made it to the heart of Haven City's defenses. The power grid was in chaos, but the Red Sun's forces were quickly regrouping. Leo knew that their only chance to succeed now was to strike at the heart of the city's infrastructure before the Red Sun realized what was happening. "We're close," Leo said, pointing to the towering structure ahead. It was the city's central command hub, where all communications and military operations were controlled. "Once we're inside, we disable their systems, and the city will fall." With no time to waste, Leo's team moved swiftly toward the entrance. They had to be fast. Any delay could cost them everything. They reached the command hub's main doors only to find them locked. "Mira, get us inside," Leo ordered. Mira quickly accessed the security panel, bypassing the lock and opening the doors. The team poured into the control center, guns raised. Red Sun soldiers were scattered throughout the room, but they were unprepared for the assault. Mira and Leo moved in tandem, taking down guards with swift efficiency. "This is it," Leo said, standing before the central control panel. "Let's shut them down." With a few quick commands, Leo initiated the shutdown sequence. The lights flickered and the screens went dark. The Red Sun's control over Haven City was beginning to crumble. "We've done it," Mira said, a sense of relief in her voice. But Leo's gaze was already on the horizon, where the battle raged above. "Not yet. We still have one more fight to win." The first phase of the Red Dawn's assault on Mars had begun with success, but there was no time to rest. The Red Sun would fight back harder than ever before, and the real battle had only just begun. As the rebels continued their fight on the ground and in the skies, one thing was clear: the future of Mars hung in the balance. With the first phase of their assault completed, the Red Dawn had struck a major blow to the Red Sun's operations on Mars. The power grid was down, key supply lines were severed, and they had captured vital intelligence. However, there was still much work to be done. Ava Kincaid and her team knew the second phase of the mission would be the most dangerous and difficult: infiltrating Haven City, the heart of the Red Sun's power, and sabotaging its central military operations. The team had split into smaller groups, each with a specific role in the assault. The majority of the rebels would continue to engage the enemy forces head-on, while the most trusted and skilled members were tasked with infiltrating Haven City's highly guarded military hub. Leo Arden and his team, familiar with the underground tunnels that ran beneath the city, would take the lead. As they stood in the shadows beneath the towering walls of Haven City, Leo led the way, his heart racing with a mix of adrenaline and determination. The city loomed above them, casting long shadows across the desolate streets. The towering spires of the military command center were just a few miles away, but getting there would be no easy task. The streets were patrolled by Red Sun forces, and the air was thick with the sound of distant gunfire and explosions. Haven City was a fortress, but Leo had spent years navigating its underground network of tunnels and service corridors. This was their only chance to get inside unnoticed. Leo turned to his team: Mira, the quiet but deadly marksman; Quinn, the explosives expert with a knack for taking out enemy vehicles; and Tessa, the communications specialist who would ensure they stayed in contact with the rest of the rebellion. They were ready, but they knew the stakes were high. "You all know the plan," Leo said, his voice low and focused. "We infiltrate the underground, take out the security checkpoints, and disable the city's communications network. Once we're inside the military hub, we plant the charges, take out the command center, and get out before the Red Sun can retaliate." Mira nodded, her face calm as always. Quinn was already checking his gear, ensuring he had enough explosives to cause maximum damage. Tessa was monitoring the communication devices, adjusting frequencies to make sure they wouldn't be detected. by Red Sun's patrols. Leo felt a surge of pride for the team. They had been through so much together, but this mission, this fight was personal. It wasn't just about reclaiming Mars. It was about setting the people free, about righting the wrongs that had been done to their families and their world. Leo knew the dangers of this mission all too well, but he wasn't about to let the Red Sun hold Mars any longer. The team moved swiftly through the narrow tunnels beneath Haven City, their movements cautious and deliberate. The stench of damp rock and old machinery filled the air, but the cool temperature of the underground was a welcome relief from the blistering heat of Mars's surface. The only sounds were the soft echo of their footsteps and the occasional hum of distant machinery. "There's a checkpoint up ahead," Tessa whispered. "We need to disable the security system before we proceed." Leo motioned for her to take the lead. She moved swiftly to a nearby control panel, hacking into the system with practiced ease. Within moments, the checkpoint's security grid was down, and the path ahead was clear. "Good work, Tessa," Leo murmured. "Let's move." The team continued forward, navigating the labyrinth of underground tunnels. The further they went, the more dangerous the path became. Red Sun forces occasionally patrolled these areas, looking for rebels or resistance fighters, but Leo's team knew how to avoid detection. They moved like shadows, invisible and silent, their every action calculated. They eventually reached the entrance to Haven City's military district. The enormous underground doors that led to the heart of the city were sealed tight, guarded by multiple layers of security. The group paused, assessing the situation. The stakes were high now. Once they were inside, there would be no turning back. "We can't risk triggering an alarm," Quinn said, eyeing the reinforced doors. "We need to breach quietly." Leo nodded and turned to Quinn. "Use the charges, small, controlled explosions. We need to keep the noise to a minimum." Quinn carefully planted the charges on the door, his hands steady despite the pressure. A soft beep signaled that the explosive had been set. The team retreated a safe distance, and with a soft, controlled blast, the door cracked open. "Go, go, go!" Leo ordered. They stormed inside, moving quickly and silently through the dimly lit corridors. They could hear the muffled sounds of guards above, but they knew time was running out. They had to get to the command center. Meanwhile, on the surface of Mars, the battle raged on. The Red Sun's forces had regrouped, bolstered by reinforcements from their central military base. The skies were filled with the sound of blasts and explosions as rebel ships engaged the Red Sun's fighters in a desperate struggle for control of the city. The ground forces had been slowly pushing forward, but with each victory, the Red Sun retaliated with brutal force. The battle had reached a critical point, and the rebels were beginning to feel the strain. Ava Kincaid, standing at the front of the command center, watched as the battle unfolded on the screen. The Red Sun's air superiority had proven to be a challenge, but the rebels had held their ground. It was only a matter of time before they breached Haven City's walls. "Report," Ava barked, her voice cutting through the room. "Sir, the airstrike on the Red Sun's command center is in motion," Elias reported. "We've secured some ground, but their artillery is still pushing back hard. We'll need more time." Ava's mind raced as she processed the information. The rebels had made progress, but the Red Sun's retaliation was swift and deadly. They couldn't afford to waste any time. She turned to her communications officer. "Get me Leo," Ava ordered. On the ground, Leo and his team continued to move deeper into the heart of the Red Sun's military operations. They had reached the central control hub, a massive, fortified structure where the Red Sun's communications and military strategies were managed. It was heavily guarded, but the team had made it this far. The real challenge now was breaching the inner sanctum and planting the explosives that would disable the Red Sun's power base for good. Leo gave the signal to move forward. They slipped into position, prepared to strike. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached the main control room. "Ready," Leo whispered to his team. With one final nod, the team burst into the control room, guns drawn. The Red Sun guards barely had time to react before they were taken down one by one. But Leo knew the real battle was about to begin. They were close to completing their mission, but the enemy would not give up so easily. The countdown to the final phase of the Red Dawn's mission had begun. With the first successful strikes against the Red Sun's power grid and military assets, the rebels were now poised for their most crucial and dangerous operation yet, taking Haven City and ending the Red Sun's reign once and for all. Ava Kincaid stood before the war room's holographic map, her fingers brushing over the glowing terrain of the city. The rebels had done everything they could to disrupt the Red Sun's operations, but now they had to confront the full force of the enemy. Haven City was a fortress, fortified walls, armed patrols, and an elite Red Sun military guarding every entrance. It was a city built for war, and the Red Sun was ready to defend it with everything they had. "We've made it this far," Ava said, her voice low and steady, "but the hardest part of this mission is still ahead. We need to take the heart of Haven City, the military command center, and we need to do it fast." Her eyes shifted to Elias Dunn, who was stationed at the console. "Report on the status of our forces." "We've hit every checkpoint, Commander. Our ground troops are ready and the airstrike team is in position," Elias replied. "But the Red Sun is not backing down. They'll be waiting for us, and they know we're coming. We've only got one shot at this." Ava nodded. She had prepared herself for this moment, tactical plans, countermeasures, and backup strategies, but nothing could truly prepare her for the intensity of what they were about to face. "Then, we hit them hard and fast," she said, turning back to the team. "The success of this mission depends on speed. Once we breach the outer gates, we need to push through to the military hub without hesitation. We can't afford to get bogged down by the resistance inside the city." On the ground, Leo Arden's team had made their way through the labyrinth of underground tunnels beneath Haven City, planting explosives and disabling key security checkpoints. The Red Sun's forces were in disarray, but Leo knew that time was running out. The final push was underway and the team was about to reach the military command center where the heart of the enemy's power lay. "Almost there," Leo said, checking his weapon. His mind was focused, but the weight of the mission pressed heavily on him. This wasn't just about taking down the Red Sun. It was about reclaiming his home, his family, and the future of Mars. The team moved swiftly through the darkened hallways of the Red Sun's command center, their eyes scanning for any sign of enemy activity. They had come this far, but the risks were greater than ever. One wrong move, one alert from the Red Sun's surveillance system, and their mission could be compromised. As they approached the inner sanctum of the command center, Leo signaled for them to stop. He crouched by the door, his fingers brushing the control panel. A soft beep confirmed that the door was locked. The team was ready. "Quinn, charge the door," Leo whispered. Quinn, the explosives expert, moved into position, placing the charge on the door's security lock. He set the timer, and they all backed away, waiting for the soft click that would signal the door's breach. Boom! The door exploded open, sending a blast of hot air and dust into the room. Leo and his team stormed in, guns drawn, ready for whatever came next. The Red Sun soldiers inside were caught off guard, but they quickly scrambled to their feet, weapons raised. Leo's team moved fast, taking down the guards one by one with precision shots. There was no time to waste. The control center needed to be disabled before the Red Sun could send reinforcements. "Get to the main console," Leo ordered, as he cleared the room of any remaining threats. Tessa, the communications expert, moved swiftly toward the control panel at the center of the room. Her fingers flew over the keys, hacking into the Red Sun's security systems. The monitors blinked to life and Tessa's voice rang out. "We're in, initiating the shutdown sequence now." Quinn stood by the door, watching for incoming Red Sun soldiers. "We've got company coming. Make it quick." Tessa worked with urgency, her eyes scanning the screen as she bypassed the security protocols. The countdown to shutdown was ticking down, but Leo knew the Red Sun wouldn't go down without a fight. "Almost there," Tessa muttered under her breath. Outside, the Red Sun's reinforcements were already mobilizing. A series of loud bangs echoed through the halls as enemy soldiers stormed the command center. Leo's team had to act fast. "We've got to hold them off while Tessa finishes the shutdown," Leo said, his voice calm but urgent. Quinn took his position near the door, setting up explosives as a last defense. Mira, the sharpshooter, positioned herself by the windows, her rifle trained on the advancing enemy forces. Just as Leo braced for the incoming battle, the computer screen in front of Tessa flickered. "Got it! The command center's down," Tessa shouted. With the main systems offline, the Red Sun's grip on Haven City was shattered. The rebels had broken through. But the battle was far from over. The enemy would fight until the last man, and Leo's team had no time to rest. Above Mars, the rebel fleet fought desperately to maintain control of the skies. The air battle was brutal, with Red Sun's TIE fighters darting through the atmosphere, clashing with rebel starfighters. Explosions filled the sky as the two sides exchanged fire, each attack more deadly than the last. Ava watched the battle unfold from the command center, her hands gripping the console as she gave her orders. The rebels had to push forward. There was no turning back now. "All ships, focus on taking down their remaining fighters," she commanded. "We need air superiority to secure the ground assault." The rebel fleet pressed forward, engaging the Red Sun's air forces in a deadly dogfight. The stakes were high. If the rebels lost control of the skies, the ground forces would be unable to hold their positions, and Haven City would remain in the hands of the Red Sun. Back in the heart of Haven City, Leo and his team made their final push toward the Red Sun's military headquarters. They had completed their mission, but the danger was far from over. The streets were alive with the sound of gunfire as the remaining Red Sun forces tried to defend their city. Leo's team had dealt a severe blow to the enemy, but the true test was still ahead. The final confrontation with General Kalen Voss, the leader of the Red Sun, who had been hiding in the heart of the city. The rebels knew they couldn't afford to let him escape. The battle for Haven City was about to reach its climax. "We've come this far," Leo said, his voice firm. "We finish this now." As they neared the central military compound, Leo knew that the final assault would be the most dangerous of all. There was no room for error. The rebels had come too far to fail now. The battle for Haven City had been long and grueling. The Red Sun forces had thrown everything they had at the Red Dawn, but despite their superior numbers and firepower, the rebels had persevered. The city's defenses had been shattered, and the power that the Red Sun had so tightly held onto was now slipping from their grasp. However, victory came at a cost. Lives had been lost, and Mars had been irrevocably changed. As the dust settled on the battlefield, Ava Kincaid stood on the balcony of the command center overlooking the city. The sound of distant explosions had faded, and the rebel forces had begun their work of securing Haven City. The streets were littered with debris, abandoned weapons, and the remains of the fierce fighting that had taken place. Ava's face was grim as she surveyed the damage. Mars had been freed from the Red Sun's iron grip, but the planet itself was in ruins. The damage to the city, the infrastructure, and the lives of its people would take years to repair. "We did it," Elias Dunn said quietly as he joined Ava on the balcony. His voice was filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. The Red Dawn had won, but the cost was far from what they had hoped for. But at what cost? Ava didn't answer right away. She knew Elias was right. They had won, but many had died. Brave men and women who had given everything for the chance to free Mars. Among them were members of their own team, friends they had fought beside from the beginning. The weight of their sacrifice hung heavily on her heart. "We have to rebuild," Ava said finally, her voice steady. "Mars is free, but it won't stay that way if we don't. We need to restore order and ensure that the Red Sun can never rise again." Leo Arden, the young Martian who had led the underground resistance, walked through the streets of Haven City, his boots crunching on the broken concrete. The city was a shadow of its former self, its once grand buildings now crumbled and scarred by the battle. As a local, Leo had always known Haven as a place of hope. The settlers who had come to Mars had dreamed of making it a thriving colony, a new home for humanity. But those dreams had been dashed by the Red Sun's reign. Now with the city in ruins, Leo couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold. The rebels had defeated the Red Sun, but what came next? The Martian people had lived under tyranny for so long, that rebuilding a functioning society would take time and effort. And then there were the many questions that still loomed. How would they govern the planet? Who would lead? Would the Red Sun's forces, scattered but not defeated, return to reclaim the planet? Leo's mind drifted back to his family, to the people he had lost during the occupation. His heart ached with the memory of the innocent lives taken by the Red Sun, but he found strength in knowing that the fight had not been in vain. Mars was free. He found himself standing in front of the command center, where Ava, Elias, and the other leaders of the Red Dawn were meeting. They had gathered to discuss the next steps in their mission, restoring order, rebuilding Mars, and ensuring that no power would ever again rise to oppress the Martian people. Inside the command center, the mood was one of both triumph and solemnity. The leaders of the Red Dawn were busy coordinating efforts to secure Haven City, assess the damages, and provide aid to the citizens. The rebellion had been successful, but now came the hardest part, the rebuilding. Ava stood in front of a holographic map of Mars, her brow furrowed as she studied the areas that had been affected by the battle. The city was in disarray, and the people were in desperate need of food, water, and medical supplies. The rebels had gained control of the planet, but the work that lay ahead seemed almost impossible. "We can't let the damage be for nothing," Ava said, her voice cutting through the room. "We've won the battle, but now we need to show the people that their sacrifice was worth it. We need to restore hope to Mars." Elias, who had been working tirelessly alongside Ava, nodded. "We've already sent out teams to begin rebuilding key infrastructure, but we need more resources, more manpower. This isn't something we can do alone." Ava turned to Leo, who had just entered the room. His face was somber, and his eyes were heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. "Leo," Ava said, "what's the situation on the ground? How are the civilians holding up?" Leo hesitated before answering, his voice quiet. "They're scared. Some are relieved, but many don't know where to turn. The Red Sun controlled everything, the food, the water, the security. Without them, the city's in chaos. People don't know who to trust anymore." Ava nodded. She knew that the next challenge would be to earn the trust of the Martian people, many of whom had been living under Red Sun rule for years. It would take time to restore order, and the rebels had to be prepared for the hard work ahead. "We need to provide security first and foremost," Ava said. "People need to feel safe. If they're going to rebuild, they need to know that they have a future to fight for." Days turned into weeks, and the reality of rebuilding Mars set in. The rebel forces worked tirelessly, clearing rubble, distributing food and medical supplies, and securing key areas of the city. Leo and his team worked alongside the rebel soldiers, helping to restore communication networks and organizing local militia groups to maintain order. Despite the progress, the situation remained volatile. There were still remnants of the Red Sun forces scattered across the planet, and some of the factions continued to resist the rebel presence. Ava and Elias worked hard to maintain the peace, but every day brought new challenges. Trust had to be earned, and there were many who had suffered too much under the Red Sun to easily accept the rebels as their new leaders. Leo knew that this was only the beginning. The rebels had done the impossible, but the real work, building a free and prosperous Mars, was still ahead. And as much as they had fought for freedom, they would need to fight even harder to ensure that Mars would never again fall under the control of those who sought to oppress the people. In the quiet of the night, as the sounds of rebuilding filled the streets of Haven City, Leo sat alone, gazing at the stars above. Mars had been reclaimed, but the cost had been great. He thought about the friends and family he had lost, the battles they had fought, and the hope that still burned in his heart. For the first time in years, Mars felt like it had a future. It wouldn't be easy, but the Martian people had shown their resilience. They had fought, and now they would rebuild. Leo knew that the future of Mars wasn't just about taking back the planet. It was about making it a place where people could live in peace, where freedom was not just a dream but a reality. Mars had been reclaimed, but the true battle had only just begun. Months had passed since the battle for Haven City had ended. The dust had settled, and Mars was slowly but surely beginning to heal. The devastation of war still lingered in the broken streets, the shattered buildings, and the deep scars left on the people. But there was something new in the air, something the Martian settlers hadn't felt in years. Hope. Ava Kincaid stood on the balcony of the rebuilt command center, looking out over the city that had been the epicenter of so much bloodshed and conflict. The towering spires of Haven City, once symbols of the Red Sun's power, were now a testament to the resilience of the Martian people. The city was being restored piece by piece, and while there was still much to be done, the direction was clear. Mars was free. "How are things on the ground?" Ava asked as Elias Dunn joined her, looking out over the city's skyline. "It's been tough," Elias admitted, his voice carrying the weight of the months they'd spent rebuilding. "But we're making progress. The people are beginning to trust us more. We're setting up new communities, providing resources and ensuring security. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Ava nodded thoughtfully, turning her gaze back to the horizon. "We've won the battle, but the war isn't over. Mars is free, but it needs to be rebuilt. And we need to make sure this never happens again." Elias glanced at her, understanding the burden she carried. "The work ahead of us is huge, but we can do it. We have the support of the Martian people now. They've seen what we've done, and they believe in us." Ava's mind lingered on the past, the sacrifices made, the lives lost, and the countless obstacles they had faced along the way. But there was a light at the end of the tunnel now. Mars had been freed from the Red Sun, and its people were beginning to rebuild. Not just physically, but emotionally. Ava had promised herself that she wouldn't let the sacrifices be in vain. She had seen too many friends, too many comrades, fall in the struggle to free Mars. And now, she owed it to them to make sure the future of Mars was one worth fighting for. Leo Arden stood at the edge of the newly reconstructed Haven City, watching as the Martian sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the red landscape. It had been months since the Red Sun's fall, and the city was slowly starting to feel alive again. The streets, once abandoned and broken, were filled with people working together to rebuild the infrastructure that had been destroyed. Leo's heart swelled with a sense of pride. Mars was finally free from the oppressive rule of the Red Sun, but there was still much work to be done. He had lost so much in the fight, the loss of his family, the suffering of his people, but it had all led to this moment. Mars was his home, and it was worth fighting for. "Leo," a voice called out. From behind him, he turned to see Mira approaching, her face soft with a hint of a smile. She had been a key member of his team, and they had shared countless moments during the battle. She had been his companion in the fight for freedom, and her strength had been invaluable. "How's the situation?" Leo asked as she reached him. "Better than I expected," Mira said with a tired smile. "The people are beginning to come together. There are still some who are skeptical, of course, but most are grateful. The work is far from over, but we've made a real difference." Leo nodded, his gaze drifting back to the horizon. "We've taken the first steps. The rest will take time, but we'll get there." "We will," Mira agreed, standing beside him. "It's strange, isn't it? After all the fighting, after all the destruction, there's still a chance for a new beginning." Leo didn't respond immediately. His thoughts were too filled with memories of the past, the battles they had fought and the faces of those who had not made it. But Mira was right. This was a new beginning, and they had the chance to shape the future. "We're going to make it work," Leo said, his voice resolute. "Mars deserves a future, and we're going to give it that future." Mira smiled at him. "We've already given them hope. Now, it's time to build something that lasts." Meanwhile, Ava sat at her desk inside the command center, sorting through data and reports. The rebuilding efforts were ongoing, but the city was beginning to show signs of life. New infrastructure was being laid down, power was being restored, and the people were slowly finding their way back to normalcy. Still, there were challenges ahead: political disagreements, logistical problems, and the lingering threat of remaining Red Sun holdouts. A soft knock on the door interrupted her. Thoughts and Leo stepped inside, followed by Mira. Ava, Leo said, his voice calm but filled with emotion. We've come a long way. The people, they're starting to believe in us. I think we've done something incredible here. Ava smiled warmly at Leo, relieved to see him back to his usual self. I'm glad to hear that. The road ahead won't be easy, but we've already taken the hardest step, giving the Martian people their freedom. Mira nodded, crossing her arms. It's not going to be a quick fix. The damage was too great. But there's a sense of hope now. People are coming together, and that's something we didn't have before. We didn't have a lot of things before, Ava replied with a wry smile. But we've got a chance now. A real chance to rebuild. Not just the city, but everything. The entire future of Mars. Leo looked around at the room, at the maps, the charts, the images of Mars's recovery. He could feel it. The momentum was building. What comes next? He asked, his voice full of anticipation. What do we do now that we've won? Ava stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the horizon. The battle was over, but the true test of their mission was just beginning. She turned to Leo and Mira with a new sense of purpose. We rebuild Mars into the world it was meant to be. We'll take care of the people. We'll make sure there's no going back to the way things were. And we'll show the galaxy what a free Mars can accomplish. She paused for a moment, her gaze lingering on the red skies of Mars. The future is ours now, and we have the chance to make it better, together. In the weeks and months that followed, Mars continued its long, slow recovery. The Red Sun's forces, though scattered, were no longer a threat, and the Martian people slowly began to rebuild their homes and communities. The Red Dawn's leadership, particularly Ava Kincaid, Leo Arden, and their comrades, worked tirelessly to ensure that the Martian people were not just freed, but also empowered to create a society built on freedom and equality. Ava's final words resonated across Mars, echoed in the minds of those who had fought and died for their world. The planet was no longer just a symbol of colonization or oppression. It was a beacon of hope. A new chapter had begun, and Mars was on its way to becoming the world it was always meant to be, a thriving, free, and independent planet for all, its people. And as the sun set over the crimson canyons and sprawling cities of Mars, there was one thing that was clear. The battle to reclaim Mars had been won, but the future was still wide open, full of possibility and promise.